China Now is a show dedicated to giving the world a global overview of today's China. Here, we explore how China works, how China thinks, and how it views itself and the rest of the world. Welcome to the show. I am Makiza Latifa. So, for today's episode, we are doing things a little differently. We begin with the Thinkers Forum, a segment presented in three parts. In the first part, we bring you an interview with Professor Shan Yi of the Fudan University, with a conversation focusing largely on China Russia relations and related geopolitical issues. Stay with us for all the insights and analysis. Let's get started.
Professor Shen, China and Russia have been moving quite closely recently. Russia granted visa-free entry to China citizens. Foreign Ministry Wang Yi met with Shoigu, and Moscow has voiced strong support for China on Taiwan question. How do you view this round of China-Russia engagement?
We are strategic partners, which means that China and Russia already built a very, creative and new patterns of the relationship among great powers. We know that traditionally, those great powers, they would like to build a so-called alliance with each other. But such kind of alliance, no matter as a political alliance or those military alliance, has a very strong negative to the outside world. For example, NATO is a very typical military diplomatic alliance in the Europe continent, which at the beginning people believe it would be a good structures providing security stabilities in that region. But the fact is, military alliance always produce worse security dilemma before comparing to the situation before the establishment of such kind of alignments, because this alignment has a very clear target toward the third parties, and then will trigger the third parties to take a defensive reactions toward that alignment. Then we have these escalations, which will finally leading to a fatal conflict among those actors. But China, Russia, these two countries, we build so-called strategic partnership. This strategic partnership is different with alliance. It means that Russia and China, in different areas, we have different positions. In some areas, we highly agree with each other. Our interesting coordinate and compete for each others. But on the other aspect, maybe we have different understandings, and we have different interestings. Because China and Russia did not sign a alignment agreement between each other, so that we can keep the flexibility and take a very practical attitude to deal with all these different issues in different ways. In this visit, when Wang Yi go to Moscow to dialogue with Shoigu, we heard a new terms that means 对表. And it's the first time we heard these terms has been used in this bilateral relationship. Say that China and Russia 对表 on those issues that the Japanese related issues. You know, in the movies, in those traditional war movies in China, 对表 that it's a very you can always see these pieces during that movies. If we want to launch some joint actions, we will say 对表, so that ensure that we can act in the proper times and sophisticated, systematically act in a coordinated ways. But its 对表 is not that provocative like that launch, like the United States said, as an alignment say that we will launch joint actions against some third parties and so on. We just show our common attitude, say that we agree on these things, and we take a common policy basement to deal with these Japanese issues, and sending a very clear signals that China and Russia will take a highly coordinated policies and strategies on all those geopolitical important issues to shape a good common security environment, which will do benefit not only to these two countries, but to the regions and to the world.
I noticed that we also know President Putin just rejected peace proposal put forward by Europe and Ukraine. Do you think Putin is using China as a leverage to pressure the United States?
If you take today's situation of the battlefield in the Ukraine, you will find there's no need for Putin to require any extra leverages to push back these requirements from European Unions or United States. The Russian troops are advancing, they are moving forward, they are taking new advanced positions in the battlefield. Russia has been cheated by the Western countries in those Ukraine issues for several times. And they take advantages and abuse Putin's trust. In the last 5 or 10 years, at least cheated him for more than 2 times. It will be mission impossible that to persuade Putin to accept their wishful thinking compromise method, which will not leading to a persistent peace in that region, which will only become the new excuse or the new trigger point for the next military conflict. China's President Xi Jinping mentioned during his dialogue with President Trump, he said that China will support any solutions that will do benefit for the persistent peace in that region, and we wish that finally those parties involved in that conflict can got a solution that will leading to an endurable peace in that region. So I think that's China's attitude.
Next on the show is the second part of the Thinkers Forum, featuring an in-depth interview with political commentator and China expert Sean Rain. So in this segment, Sean weighs in on the current situation in Venezuela, offering analysis on the country's political and economic challenges, the role of external pressures, and how global powers, including China and the US, are shaping development on the ground. The discussion also explores what Venezuela's trajectory means for the broader global south and the evolving international order.
But what I'm most concerned about is the United States always needs to have an enemy. And the United States always needs to spend money on its military defense and needs to get the warmongers and the weapon manufacturers wealthy. So literally, as soon as we might be seeing the end of the war in Ukraine, we're starting to see armed aggression against Venezuela. And, I'm not an expert there, but the playbook is very similar. The United States says there's an evil despot, whether it be in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria, or now Venezuela. They make up a lot of allegations and accusations about fentanyl production, cocaine production, sexual abuse. I don't know if any of it's true. And I don't know if Maduro, the president of Venezuela, stole the election, is a good guy or not. But what I do know is that the United States right now is using double standards when it comes towards trying to resolve what could be a legitimate problem in Venezuela, but they're using illegitimate meetings by bombing fishermen in Venezuela who they are accused of drug running. And importantly, it seems that the order was given to kill all of these Venezuelans and some Trinidadians, even after their boat was blown up and they were just floating in the water, not causing any type of risk to the United States. Now, it's very clear under American military law that you have to allow somebody to surrender. You have to give them quarter. You can't just kill them. And so I think it's really important that we have investigations into exactly what is happening in Venezuela and hold people accountable, whether that be Peter Hegsworth, the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War in the United States, the admirals who supposedly greenlit the attacks, because I think it's important that if America wants to be considered the world leader, if you want to have a rules-based world order, if you want America to be the global hegemon, it can't have double standards. It can't have one set of standards for China and Iran, and then a different set of standards from the United States. If the US is murdering people, then American leaders who greenlit those attacks need to be held accountable. Because if they don't, then our adversaries and our enemies will say, well, the United States did this, we can do the exact same thing. I mean, let's look at Gaza and let's look at Israel, right? Again, I'm Jewish, but I don't like what the IDF or Israeli government is doing by killing many innocent women and children and men in Gaza. If they kill anybody, they should be condemned and held accountable. Similarly, though, Hamas, I condemn them. If they are killing innocent people, if they're torturing innocent Israelis, and if they're raping anyone. I think what's clear is the world needs to have one set of laws, one set of standards that they apply to everybody. If you do something illegal, if you do something that hurts people, whether you're Israeli, whether you're Ghazian, Palestinian, whether you're Chinese, or whether you're American, you have to be held accountable. You can't say the other side is a terrorist, which justifies your own terrorist actions, because then you're forever going to be in war. Frankly, it's very difficult for small nations to navigate and balance through the geopolitical tension between the United States and China. I mean, America always criticizes China for using economic coercion or bullying, right? If China isn't happy with another country, whether it be a larger country like Japan, a smaller country like Lithuania, or the Philippines or South Korea, China will use its economic heft, its economic strength to punish the other nation. You know, they will say, we are going to cancel flights to Japan so that Chinese tourists can't spend the billions and billions a year there. We're not going to allow Japanese concert singers and performers to perform in China. And China uses their economic strength as a stick to punish other nations. But let's be honest, America, especially over the last year or two, is using as much economic coercion, if not more, than China. And they're actually going even more personal. You know, America is saying to a lot of Latin American and Caribbean nations, basically essentially under a modern version of the Monroe Doctrine. And they're saying, if you don't heed American power, we're going to ban you from entering the United States and we're going to seize your assets. And they're doing that to the president of Colombia. And they've threatened to do it to all of the nations and their officials. But they're going even farther than just saying the politician. They're saying we're going to ban the politician and their family, even their kids. And this is causing a lot of fear for a lot of these smaller nations because some of them only have a few 100,000 people. They only have 1 million or 2 million people. And their kids are actually now working in the United States. So one of the big criticisms I have of Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States, is he's undoing what I would consider to be law and also just morality. If you want to punish a government official, that's one thing, but you can't punish their family. The family didn't do anything wrong. And so it's vassalizing and bullying these smaller nations, frankly, in a way that China's never has done. China just says, I don't want to do business with you. So what should small countries do? Frankly, you have to make a choice. You have to either choose to go with the United States or go with China. It's almost impossible to be neutral. There are only maybe 2 countries in the world that have been able to be fairly neutral right now. You know, New Zealand and Singapore. If I were advising their presidents or prime ministers, I would continue to try to be neutral and continue to do economic trade with China because China is an unstoppable economic force. China is going to continue to be the major growth driver of the world. I expect it to account for about 30% of economic growth over the next 5 years, and the IMF agrees with me. I expect that China will replace America in the next 15 to 20 years as the world's largest economy. But you have to try to maintain good relations with the United States too by placating them. But it's a very difficult dance to weave, frankly, right now for small countries. I miss the America of the 80s and the 90s. They were confident. They wanted China to grow to some extent. They wanted China to build the iPhones and the Nike shoes that Americans love. They hoped, frankly, that Chinese people would overthrow the Communist Party and become a liberal democracy. But I do think that, under the Clinton era and under the Bush era, America was fairly benevolent towards China and wanted China to grow. We've now reached the point where China is so powerful that America is at once scared and unconfident because of China's rise, but they're also sticking to this arrogance and aggressiveness of America being number one and the only power. And so they're creating a cycle of negative policies where they try to hurt China and create an enemy where I don't think there was one before. And you see younger Chinese, they don't really like America in the same way that Chinese in their 50s, 60s, and 70s like America. And that's a very dangerous situation for the world. America needs to allow and be gracious about China's rise. And then both countries can benefit economically. But if you don't have that, you're going to have a lot of tension that can only go wrong. What I'm hopeful of is that Trump and future presidents in the United States can be less warlike and aggressive when talking about China. And I think to Trump's credit, he actually has said Xi Jinping is a friend, China is a good country, we have good relations. He has been using a lot less aggressive and warlike words when it comes to China than Biden did, than Obama did. And to Trump's credit, I think he's trying to put the relationship back on course. I think his problem is he has a lot of war hawks and bigots around him, like Scotty Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, like Howie Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. So in many ways, I feel that Trump is sort of holding the dam of Sinophobia from spilling out everywhere. But again, it comes down to the problem of Trump lacking dignity and professionalism and using too many strong, craven words to describe the world. Hopefully, over the next 10, 20 years, we'll get calmer American politicians. If I ever run for president, which I'm thinking about doing, then yeah, I think we would get the relations good again. But unless you get someone like me who loves both countries, unfortunately, I think we're going to have multi-decade Cold War.
And wrapping up this week's show is the third and final part of the Thinkers Forum, featuring an interview with Annalisa Lowe, former ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago to China. In this conversation, Ambassador Lowe offers valuable insights into how Caribbean nations navigate their relationships with both China and the United States, balancing economic cooperation, diplomatic interest, and political pressures in an increasingly competitive global environment. She also reflects on the opportunities and challenges facing small states as they engage major powers while safeguarding their own development priorities and regional interest.
My name is Annalisa Lau. I served as the ambassador of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the People's Republic of China, with concurrent accreditation to the Republic of Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Brunei. It really was a tremendous privilege and honor to serve the interests of 1.4 million people in the Caribbean, in a country of over 1.4 billion people. Our country, Trinidad and Tobago, is located on the southernmost chain of Caribbean islands, located in the Caribbean Sea. We are a country that is known for having a mature hydrocarbon province. The majority of our GDP comes from oil and gas, and we are also diversifying our economy by looking at high value and light manufacturing. We have a bustling and booming tourism industry as well, and we are known for having rich tourism resources. So I hope that many of our Chinese friends could come to Trinidad and Tobago to experience the warmth of the Caribbean islands. Come and experience the greatest show on earth, which is known as our world-famous carnival, where you can dress up in our brightly colored, locally crafted carnival costumes and sing and dance with us for 2 days in the street. You can hear our indigenous music, such as our soca, calypso, chutney soca, that fuels the very pulse of our nation. You can experience our steel pan, which is the first percussion musical instrument that was created in the 19th century. And it really symbolizes the strength, resilience, creativity, and innovation of our people. I think that my multi-ethnic heritage profoundly influenced my outlook and my view of China. My paternal grandparents would have left Zhongshan in Guangdong province in the late 1940s, early 1950s to find new opportunities and to build a new life in Trinidad and Tobago. And like most Chinese migrants who went overseas to build a new life and to find new opportunities, they brought with them a fierce entrepreneurial spirit and traditional Chinese values and customs such as sacrificing self for the betterment of the next generation. They taught us the value of hard work and the importance of family and giving back to community. And I think that having been brought up in a Chinese household and been raised with Chinese customs and values as well, I have never seen China as foreign. I've never seen China as distant or the other, but I have this profound respect and deep admiration and appreciation for China's development pathways and China's modernization plan. And many of the values that I have been brought up with, I see it here today in China's contemporary society. And I see that as being the backbone of Chinese values as well. And I have a deeper understanding of what drives China's economic trajectory as well. So I think that having that lens, having that multicultural lens, and being of, partly Chinese and Indian descent and having this Caribbean identity as well, I think that has also profoundly influenced my outlook and how I view China. Not many people know about the deeper political and cultural connections that exist between Trinidad and Tobago and China. For example, our relationship is one that preceded the official establishment of diplomatic relations in 1974. The first group of Chinese migrants actually arrived in Trinidad and Tobago from China in 1806 from Canton, or in southern China. It was the first organized settlement of Chinese migration coming to our shores. And from since then, we have had many different waves of migrants and many different exchanges of values, ideas, and culture as well. It was during 1974 when we first became a republic. Our first prime minister, Dr. Eric Williams, traveled to China. It was the first visit by a Caribbean head of state that was paid to China at that time. And he met Chairman Mao Zedong and Premier Zhou Enlai, and he decided to establish and formalize official diplomatic relations with China. And it was through his strategic leadership and visionary foresight that he sought to concretize pragmatic cooperation and relinkages with China as we continue to design and craft our way as a newly formed republic. And apart from the historical ties as well, China has a very strong footprint and connection to Trinidad and Tobago. The very emblems, our insignia of nationhood, such as our national flag, our coat of arms, were actually designed by a Trinidadian of Chinese descent, Mr. Carlisle Chang, who designed our national emblems in 1962. There was also John Lelam, who was a Chinese who emigrated to Trinidad and Tobago, and he invested heavily in the petroleum sector, and that became the economic backbone of Trinidad and Tobago, and being the oil and gas country, the oil and gas producer that we know today. Now, apart from that, it would be remiss of me not to mention the reciprocal connections and the reciprocal contributions of many of our people from Trinidad and Tobago to China. For example, Dai Alian. Many people may know, but she is considered the mother of Chinese modern dance. She is the co-founder of the Beijing Dance Academy and the principal of the National Ballet of China. She was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, and she was from a Cantonese family as well. There's also Eugene Chen. He was born and raised in my hometown, San Fernando, and he was the first foreign minister of China and also the legal advisor of the revolutionary statesman Sun Yat-sen. He also created some of the first Chinese newspapers in the English language that spoke out against the British imperialist interests at the time. So there are many, many different close cultural and political connections between China and Trinidad and Tobago that form the formidable foundation of our relationship that gives way for deeper cooperation and many, many years of stable and reliable friendship. I see a lot of opportunities between Trinidad and Tobago and China, and of course the wider Caribbean and their cooperation with China. China right now is leading the charge on this new wave of technological innovation. It's a new technological revolution. And the Caribbean region can learn a lot from China in terms of how we can use technology in some of our key strategic sectors. How do we integrate? How do we inject new forms of innovation and technology into our agricultural sector, into tourism, into our public healthcare system, into our public sector, where we optimize our functionality and optimize our operations for meeting the needs of our people? So we have a lot to learn from China in terms of how do we transform our economy, transform our society. Many of us in the Caribbean region, we are trying to achieve digital transformation. And we know that we can work with China, who has always been a stable and reliable partner. Apart from that, I know that there are many different challenges, such as geopolitics. You know, sometimes when different countries, they get a little too close to China, there may be different tensions and pressures from other international partners as well. But sometimes, you know, smaller countries, they do get caught up in that noise. And it's important to recognize that for small nations, we need to speak confidently and share that our foreign policy is made in Port of Spain, not necessarily in London or Washington or Beijing. And it's important to speak on the national interests of your country and to work with all of our international partners who meet the interests of our people. I see the Belt and Road Initiative as being one of the most transformative platforms that could be used towards achieving tangible outcomes and benefits for many nations, particularly small island developing countries, smaller nations, and the global south in general. It was in 2018 when our former Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, came to China, and he would have paid an official visit to China then, where our country became the first English-speaking Caribbean country and the first in CARICOM to sign on to the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's through the BRI we would have worked with our Chinese friends to develop critical infrastructure, roadways, airports, public health institutions like hospitals, and new commercial spaces such as industrial parks that allowed our country to undertake and undergo meaningful economic diversification that also allowed us to lessen our dependency on our oil and gas reserves. So the BRI really provided that opportunity for us to realize our vision of making Trinidad and Tobago the gateway for doing business for China, between North and South America as well. The Caribbean region now houses the flagship Belt and Road Initiative project called the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate, and it is the first environmentally friendly, 5G connected, intelligent industrial park that is meant to catalyze the growth of Trinidad and Tobago's non-energy manufacturing sectors such as light and high-value manufacturing, logistics, warehousing, distribution, and emerging technologies as well. And I've had the pleasure of working with a number of Chinese companies, all in the eastern parts of China, hosting many different business delegations, who would have expressed an interest in expanding their manufacturing operations and expanding their factories into Trinidad and Tobago so that they could now export into North America. The Chinese factories that set up their operations in Trinidad and Tobago have access to over 997 million consumers across Latin America. And Trinidad and Tobago is one of the most ideal investment destinations for Chinese manufacturers who would like to have a greater footprint in the Americas and who would like to expand their business operations there. So the BRI really provides this opportunity for there to be tangible outcomes, and it provides a platform for there to be great economic cooperation, and it's a true illustration of South-South cooperation. With China, no matter the size, the scale, the size of your market, China has always shown a willingness to work with smaller nations, especially in relation to helping our interests be met for our people and helping along and facilitating our development trajectory. So the BRI has been a very, very positive cooperation mechanism for the people in Trinidad and Tobago. I do know that there is a lot of debate around the generalized conceptualization of the term Global South nations, given that we are separated and differentiated by many different factors, such as differences in our historical legacies, our cultural diversity, differences in our ethnic composition, religious and political philosophies as well. There are differences in our size, scale, market, resources. But I think that there is one overarching framework and one vision that really unifies the Global South group of nations, and that is to achieve common and equitable development for all of our people. I think that the Global South is really operating quite differently from generations past. You're seeing, many different changes in technological capabilities, economic capacity, with the increase in sovereign wealth funds and new development banks that provide alternative financing solutions as compared to northern financial institutions. I think that this combination is really giving way to unprecedented political assertiveness amongst the Global South group of nations. Here you are seeing Global South nations exert their autonomy. They are banding together, ensuring that there is more regional integration, regional cooperation across many different institutions and organizations, such as CARICOM, CELAC, the African Union, ASEAN as well. So you're seeing many different types of cooperation, many different types of pragmatic partnerships that are happening across borders and sectors in relation to how the Global South nations operate. For example, recently at the APEC summit, we saw Brazilian President Lula, who would have had bilateral discussions with the ASEAN representatives. We saw South African President Cyril Ramaphosa as well. Also, non-ASEAN nation, of course, having discussions with different representatives as well. So we are seeing many different types of cooperation, many different levels of diplomatic dialogue happening, because the Global South nations have so many different and pressing challenges and complex challenges at that. And we have to find innovative solutions at finding ways of dealing with these challenges. There is so much geopolitical noise and geopolitical tensions that really outline the parameters in which Global South nations operate. But I don't think that these tensions really dictate the behavior of Global South nations, given that they are now becoming even more assertive in terms of finding different solutions and crafting different types of partnerships. So it is a very different season, it's a very different time, and it's a very different political order, I would say, that is being crafted. The future is in the Global South. The Global South houses over 70% of the wind and solar resources. Over 80% of the middle class is going to reside in the Global South by 2030. The Global South nations also have over 50% of the world's critical minerals as well. With an aging northern population and a youthful Global South population, you are seeing that the productive forces are changing and the systems are being realigned. So there's a lot of movement happening with the Global South nations, and there's a lot of investment happening from China as well, going into Latin America and the Caribbean region. I think that now is a time for us to keep a keen eye on Global South nations as we continue to work towards building up the type of common and equitable development that we need for our people. Caribbean nations and through our regional organization known as CARICOM, the Caribbean Community, we really see that there is strength in our diversity. We see strength in our togetherness, and we are stronger together. As small island developing countries where we face significant vulnerabilities and different challenges given our small size, our limitations in resources, capital, expertise, human capital, we know that we are very vulnerable and we have to work together in order to have our respective national and regional positions vocalized and verbalized on the international stage. And through the framework of CARICOM, many of our Caribbean countries, our Caribbean member states, we work together to have more mobility between our countries in terms of movement of skills, labor, people. We try to have more air linkages as well and to foster stronger trade and investment and different partnerships across borders and sectors. For example, in the last couple of years, Trinidad and Tobago was leading the charge towards having a stronger energy resilience in the region. Guyana was pushing forward in terms of having more food security and agricultural resilience and agricultural cooperation amongst many of our Caribbean countries as well. I know that Prime Minister Mia Mottley in Barbados was also pushing for more financial independence and more climate financing for the majority of the Caribbean countries who face unique vulnerabilities in terms of our disaster preparedness and, of course, our effects that we feel from climate change. So we do operate in tandem with each other, and we strive to meet the needs of our people by ensuring that working together is within our interest as Caribbean nations. In reflecting on my political philosophy, which I tend to draw from some of the great political thinkers and the politicians in the Caribbean region, it's through that lens that I've adopted the view that smaller nations should always strive to have their foreign policy that is premised on omnidirectional engagement. If we think back at the famous words of the late Prime Minister of Barbados, Errol Barrow, who once said that we are friends of all but satellites of none. And in the words of former Prime Minister Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, who also said, Trinidad and Tobago is a small nation, but we are not insignificant. And I think that it's critically important for smaller countries, smaller nations, and of course, under the wider umbrella of the Global South nations as well, to always strive to have omnidirectional engagements. And that is working with different partners according to the interests and according to the issues that matter most to you and for your people as well. So during my time as ambassador, we would have worked with China towards building up critical infrastructure such as hospitals, roadways, airports, and new commercial spaces such as our industrial parks, which allowed us to foster meaningful economic diversification. We have worked with the United States of America on education and security cooperation. We've worked with India on public health cooperation, pharmaceutical cooperation as well. We've worked with Africa on agro-processing and energy cooperation with Ghana. We've worked with our CARICOM brothers and sisters towards fostering more stronger mobility of people, skills, and resources within the region. So it's important for smaller nations to continue to work with our international partners and to have an approach of non-alignment, because diplomacy is not a luxury, it's an existential necessity. And for smaller nations where we have certain vulnerabilities and we face different complex challenges, it's important for us to remember that we ought to work with many, many different partners. Local politics, domestic politics can have widespread repercussions, and that can change the international order as well. So it's important for us to not be aligned to any one power and to continue to build bridges and formidable friendships with all of our allies and international partners.
And that brings us to the end of this week's edition of China Now. Today, through the Thinkers Forum, we've explored key global dynamics from China-Russia relations and the shifting geopolitical landscape to the evolving situation in Venezuela, and finally, how Caribbean nations carefully navigate their relationships with both China and the US. And these conversations highlight the complexity of today's international order and the many perspectives shaping how China engages with the world. I am Makiza Latifa, and thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with more in-depth discussions and global insights. But until then, stay informed and enjoy the rest of our programs.